Prince Harry lay trembling on a hospital bed, and what he whispered has stunned the entire world. "Please, don't let her in." It began with a whisper, not a scream, not a plea, but a trembling whisper that slipped from the lips of a man who once walked behind his mother's coffin, stoic-faced, in front of millions. That man, Prince Harry, was now lying on a hospital bed in Santa Barbara, semi-conscious, soaked in sweat, heart racing, blood pressure dangerously high. And in that vulnerable moment, surrounded by nurses, beeping machines, and quiet urgency, he reportedly muttered something that chilled everyone in the room. "Please, don't let her in." Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. No name was spoken aloud, but everyone in the room knew exactly who he meant. Within hours, that whisper became a spark. That spark became a fire. And soon, the world was engulfed in speculation, accusation, and disbelief. What had happened behind closed doors between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle that left the Duke of Sussex begging hospital staff to keep his wife away? It wasn't just a line muttered during a health scare. It was a cry of something deeper. Perhaps a cry for space. Perhaps a cry for help. Or perhaps it was the final fracture in a marriage that had been held together more by optics than trust. Earlier that same day, things had seemed almost ordinary in Montecito. The sun was out. The press had mostly been silent. Meghan had made a brief appearance at a charity luncheon the day before. Harry had been seen jogging through the hills just days prior, accompanied by a bodyguard and a few curious onlookers. But behind the gates of their sprawling mansion, tension was boiling over. Sources close to the couple alleged that a massive argument erupted between the Duke and Duchess. It wasn't the first, but this time it was different. This time, Harry's response wasn't rage, it was collapse. According to an insider who spoke under anonymity, the argument revolved around Harry's growing discomfort with his life in the U.S., the nonstop media strategy, the branding deals, and the isolation from his family in the UK. He allegedly told Meghan, "I don't even recognize who I am anymore." That single statement, the source claims, sent everything spiraling. Doors slammed. Voices were raised. And minutes later, Harry locked himself in a guest bedroom, where he was later found unresponsive and struggling to breathe. A private security team, trained in first response care, was immediately summoned. But when Harry's condition worsened, dizziness, sweating, palpitations, they had no choice but to contact emergency services. Within the hour, he was rushed to a private clinic not far from their Montecito estate. Meghan, surprisingly, did not accompany him. Instead, she remained at the residence, reportedly shaken but unmoved. Her team insisted it was to give him space. But hospital staff saw it differently. One nurse, who has since been placed on administrative leave after allegedly leaking details to the media, claimed that Harry repeatedly muttered the same phrase once sedated and placed on oxygen. "Don't let her near me. Not now. Please." Those words, small, quiet, nearly lost among the bustle of urgent care, were electric in their implications. This was a man whose marriage had long been the subject of scrutiny. From the outset, Harry and Meghan's story had captivated the world. The prince who broke free. The actress who entered the palace. The fairy tale that turned revolutionary. And yet, behind that polished Netflix sheen and those curated photo shoots, there were signs, subtle, but now impossible to ignore, that the foundation was cracking. Royal watchers and critics alike had raised red flags over the years. Harry's visible discomfort during certain interviews. The way he often deferred to Meghan in public. The rare but telling moments when his expressions hinted at internal conflict. And then, of course, there were the distancing moves, stepping back from royal duties, relocating to California, launching Archewell. All noble on paper, yet deeply isolating for a man raised in duty, tradition, and family bonds. Now, lying in a hospital bed with monitors tracking every heartbeat, that isolation was no longer metaphorical, it was medical. A panic attack, according to the hospital's internal report, brought on by extreme psychological stress, exhaustion, and, as one doctor allegedly wrote, environmental pressure factors. Meghan's absence from the clinic didn't go unnoticed, nor did her attempt to arrive hours later, an attempt reportedly blocked at the request of Harry himself. Security footage obtained by a paparazzo shows Meghan standing at the entrance, speaking with hospital staff, her body language tense, agitated. She was not allowed entry. She left soon after in a black SUV, windows up, face obscured. Inside the walls of the hospital, Harry rested, But his mind, it seemed, was far from peaceful. Sources say he refused to speak much, barely ate, was visited only by a senior royal aide, name withheld, and a private therapist. Not a single statement came from the palace, nor did any acknowledgement from Meghan's publicist beyond a brief no comment. And the silence was deafening. The media, predictably, went into overdrive. Was this the beginning of the end for Harry and Meghan? Had the prince finally reached his breaking point? Was that whisper, "Don't let her in," not just about that moment, but about years of emotional fatigue, public performance, and private resentment? Social media exploded. Hashtag Let Harry Heal began trending. Commentators split into factions. Some defended Meghan, insisting the press was once again demonizing her unfairly. Others expressed concern that Harry was a man slowly unraveling under the weight of a carefully curated reality. Mental health advocates called for compassion. Pundits called for accountability. But beyond the noise, one truth remained. Harry's health had hit a critical low. And in that moment a network error occurred. Please check your connection and try again. If this issue persists, please contact us through our help center at help.openai.com. The day began without warning of the emotional hurricane that would follow. On the surface, July 1st was like many others in Montecito: clear skies, coastal breezes, and a mansion nestled in privacy. The estate of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle appeared quiet, calm even, to passing drones and long-lens photographers. But inside those manicured walls, something was unraveling. And what took place behind closed doors would mark one of the most alarming personal breakdowns in recent royal history. It reportedly started in the late morning, just before noon. According to one staff member familiar with the household schedule, Meghan had returned from a brief meeting in Los Angeles the night before, already tense. The morning began with routine discussion, schedules, meetings, a conversation about their planned upcoming podcast episode. Harry, still in his sleepwear, was reportedly withdrawn, slow to respond, distracted. He had been that way for days, the aide recalled. Quiet, lost in thought. His workouts had become less frequent. His appetite, barely present. He spent hours in his study alone. The therapy appointments were still happening, but something was shifting. And Meghan, it seemed, noticed. She reportedly pressed him that morning, accusing him of disengaging from their goals, that he didn't care about their brand, that he wasn't present. And then came the flashpoint. Insiders say Meghan allegedly confronted Harry with news that a major deal, one with a global lifestyle company, was on the line, and that his silence and lack of cooperation were costing them millions. She allegedly accused him of self-sabotage, of drifting, of abandoning everything they had built together. And Harry, clearly overwhelmed, reportedly replied with words that struck like an earthquake through the household. "I don't want this anymore. Not like this. I can't live like this." Those were the words, according to a longtime staff member, that sent Meghan into a fury. She reportedly raised her voice, demanding he explain what that meant. "Are you leaving me?" she allegedly shouted. "Are you running away again?" But Harry didn't respond. He stood up and left the room. He went upstairs, locked himself in the guest suite they once used during renovations. From that point forward, everything escalated rapidly. According to internal security logs, leaked later to a tabloid outlet and partially corroborated by a Montecito paramedic, one of the estate's senior staff members noticed something was wrong when Harry did not respond to repeated knocks. After more than 30 minutes of silence, they used an emergency key to unlock the door. What they found shocked them. Harry was slumped against the edge of the bed, disoriented, pale, and visibly sweating. His breath was shallow, his skin cold to the touch. A bottle of anxiety medication lay unopened on the bedside table. He looked up at the staffer and reportedly tried to speak, but couldn't form full sentences. That's when the panic set in. The staffer called for medical assistance via the estate's private radio system, triggering a code amber among the home's team, a distress protocol reserved for health emergencies or threats. Within minutes, Meghan appeared at the hallway threshold but was stopped by one of the staff, who urged her to wait outside the room. Meghan, reportedly confused and upset, tried to enter but was told it would be better for the medical team to handle the situation. One source inside the estate at the time said she looked genuinely concerned, but there was also this strange tension, like she was angry with him for causing a scene. A private in-house paramedic team, always on standby for high-profile estates like theirs, arrived within 10 minutes. But upon assessing Harry's vitals, they deemed his condition too unstable to treat in home. His heart rate was spiking erratically. His blood pressure was elevated. He was struggling to maintain consciousness. A decision was made to transport him to a private clinic in Santa Barbara, one known for handling celebrity and royal-level discretion. The paramedics reportedly asked Meghan if she wanted to ride with him. Her response remains a point of contention. Some claim she refused. Others claim she was advised against it due to security complications. But what is certain is that Harry left the estate in the back of a discreet, unmarked SUV without Meghan. En route to the clinic, Harry drifted in and out of coherence. It was during one of these semi-conscious moments that he reportedly uttered the phrase that would dominate headlines hours later. A nurse riding alongside him in the vehicle later told a friend, who later leaked the quote, that Harry repeated a single phrase 3 times, "Please, don't let her in." He didn't say Meghan. He didn't mention his wife by name. But the context was unmistakable. Upon arrival at the Santa Barbara clinic, Harry was rushed into a private room away from general access. He was placed on oxygen and connected to monitoring devices. Medical staff began administering anti-anxiety medication and fluids. While the clinic remained silent officially, sources inside say his initial diagnosis was clear: acute panic attack, bordering on full mental collapse. Meanwhile, back in Montecito, Meghan was reportedly making calls to advisors, to publicists, possibly even to her attorneys. Within an hour, media whispers began circulating. A royal health emergency. Paparazzi began gathering around the clinic. The hospital sealed the front entrance and rerouted visitors to protect patient privacy. Still, the story was leaking, and fast. Around mid-afternoon, Meghan reportedly arrived at the clinic. Surveillance footage, later described but never released, shows her dressed in black, wearing sunglasses, flanked by a female assistant. She appeared calm but determined. When she reached the check-in point, sources say she gave her name but was told she would need to wait for authorization from the patient. That moment, when she was denied entry, marks what many now consider the turning point in this unfolding saga. Hospital staff say she initially stood quietly, then requested to speak to someone higher up. When she was told it was policy to wait for patient clearance, she reportedly asked if Harry was awake. A staff member replied, "He's resting, and he hasn't authorized any visits." Meghan then said, "I'm his wife," and waited for an exception. None was given. After several tense minutes, she left. The staff who interacted with her later described her demeanor as cold and unreadable. Inside, Harry remained sedated, monitored, alone. By early evening, royal aides had been informed. It's unclear if Charles or William contacted the clinic directly, but it is confirmed that a royal security liaison made contact. Discussions were had about Harry's condition, his mental state, and whether anyone from the royal family should be permitted to visit. The answer, at the time, was a firm no. He was not ready for visitors. Doctors kept him overnight. His condition stabilized physically, but emotionally, there were deep concerns. One physician allegedly remarked to a colleague, "This wasn't just a panic attack. This was someone who has been carrying emotional weight for years, and something snapped." That night, Montecito fell quiet. No official statements. No interviews. No PR spin. Just a single, haunting reality: a prince, once beloved across continents, lay in a hospital bed by himself, whispering to no one, afraid of someone he once called the love of his life. News crews began setting up outside the gates of the clinic. The headlines were relentless by dawn. Harry's breakdown. Panic in paradise. Prince pleads for isolation. But behind the tabloid theatrics, a serious question emerged. What exactly had Meghan done or said that led her husband, in his most vulnerable hour, to reject her presence entirely? There was no clear answer. Not yet. But one thing was becoming painfully obvious. This wasn't just about a bad day. It was about years of pressure, unresolved wounds, a man suffocating under the image crafted around him. And in that moment, as July 1st turned into July 2nd, the world held its breath, wondering what the next 24 hours might bring, wondering if this was just an emotional breakdown or a collapse of something far more permanent. Harry had survived the panic attack, but the deeper damage, the emotional, marital, and public ramifications, was only beginning. In the history of modern royalty, few moments have carried the same haunting resonance as the whisper that left Prince Harry's lips that day in the Santa Barbara clinic. It was quiet, fragile, barely above a murmur. But within hours, it would dominate global headlines, ignite speculation across continents, and call into question the very fabric of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's marriage. Please, don't let her in. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was their weight, the context, the fear, the desperation behind them. They weren't uttered in front of cameras. They weren't scripted by PR consultants. They weren't for effect. These were the words of a man stripped of all pretense, unwell, unguarded, unfiltered. And someone heard them. According to sources inside the clinic, one of the attending nurses, reportedly a longtime employee trusted with VIP patients, was close enough to Harry's bedside during his initial sedation to hear him speak those words. At first, she thought it was part of a dream. Sedatives often cause disorientation. But Harry repeated it. Don't let her in. Not now. She stepped back. Another nurse looked at her, startled. It was clear Harry wasn't talking about just any visitor. He was making a very specific plea. The nurses, trained in discretion, said nothing at the time. They continued their duties. But behind the scenes, the atmosphere shifted. Everyone knew who her meant. By the time the whisper reached a friend of the nurse, a friend who happened to freelance for a UK media site, the story began to spiral. Within 12 hours, an anonymous tip was submitted to 2 separate tabloid newsrooms. It was vague at first. Prince Harry refuses to let Meghan visit him in hospital. But by the next morning, a more specific line emerged. He whispered, "Don't let her in." The quote caught fire. Editors rushed to verify. Fact-checkers reached out to the hospital, but the clinic, respecting privacy, declined to comment. Still, the phrase was too powerful, too visceral to ignore. Soon, it made the front page of one major tabloid. The headline read, "The Whisper That Shook the Crown." From there, the internet erupted. Social media timelines filled with theories. Clips of Harry and Meghan from interviews, red carpet moments, and documentaries were reanalyzed. Viewers looked for signs, body language, tension, unease. TikTok exploded with side-by-side videos showing Harry glancing downward while Meghan answered questions for him. Twitter users pointed out subtle flinches, awkward silences, uncomfortable glances. Was Harry afraid of Meghan? Had he been quietly suffering in silence for years? Was this whisper the moment he finally broke through a wall he'd spent so long building? Others leapt to Meghan's defense, accusing the media of weaponizing a fragile moment for clicks. They pointed out her years of public scrutiny, racist coverage, and tabloid attacks. It's a panic attack, some said. He was delirious. People say things when they're not in their right mind. Others went further, claiming the media was twisting the event to vilify Meghan once again. But the damage was done. The quote had landed. And it wasn't going anywhere. Within 48 hours, over 600 articles had been written about the incident. Newsrooms from Sydney to Johannesburg ran variations of the story. Major cable networks led with breaking alerts. Royal biographers were summoned to studios to offer insight. Even Buckingham Palace, typically silent during Sussex drama, was said to be closely monitoring the situation. One former palace aide, speaking anonymously, told a respected British journalist, "Whatever that whisper meant, it's changed everything. This isn't tabloid fluff anymore. This is a man at his breaking point." What made the quote so powerful was not just what was said, but what it implied. The choice of the word, please. The repetition. The timing. This wasn't an act of betrayal. It wasn't a smear. It was a vulnerable man requesting distance from his wife in his most broken moment. For many, it cast doubt on everything the couple had presented publicly. Commentators took sides. Piers Morgan, predictably, exploded on his morning program, calling it the beginning of the unraveling of the biggest PR scam of the decade. On the opposite side, progressive hosts defended Meghan, accusing tabloids of using a moment of mental crisis to further a misogynistic agenda. But beyond the noise, regular people, the silent majority, were moved by something else entirely: sadness. The sight of Prince Harry, a once jovial child, now a grown man whispering from a hospital bed, touched a deep emotional chord. Many saw echoes of Diana's trauma. Others saw themselves. One viral comment read, "I whispered something similar when I was in the hospital and didn't want my emotionally abusive partner near me. I believe Harry." Suddenly, the story was no longer about royal drama. It was about mental health, emotional safety, and the right to personal boundaries. Psychologists began weighing in. Dr. Maya Gleason, a trauma therapist interviewed by several outlets, noted that such a whisper is often a protective reflex. She said, when someone is in crisis, they revert to instinct. If Harry asked not to see his wife, Even unconsciously, it means that emotionally, her presence was triggering, whether due to stress, fear, or unresolved conflict. Meghan's camp remained silent for days. That silence became its own kind of response. Was she regrouping? Planning a counter-narrative? Or did she feel there was nothing she could say that wouldn't backfire? Eventually, her spokesperson issued a brief, tightly worded statement. The Duchess of Sussex has always supported her husband's well-being and continues to do so. It was intended to diffuse tension, but it landed flat. The word "continues" sparked debate. If she continued to support him, why wasn't she allowed in? Reporters pressed further. Meghan's allies were dispatched to drop subtle hints to the media. One claimed Harry had been overwhelmed by the media storm and simply needed time alone. Another suggested the hospital staff had misunderstood his words. A third hinted that the phrase might have been taken out of context entirely. But the damage was irreparable. The phrase had already taken on a life of its own. In London, palace insiders debated whether this was the moment to open a channel back to Harry directly. There were hushed conversations. Would William reach out? Would Charles send an emissary? Had Harry finally hit the point of no return, not with the palace, but with his own wife? The royal institution had long kept Harry at arm's length since the Oprah interview, afraid of further scandal. But now, faced with a man unraveling in public, their duty as family seemed to reassert itself. Reports emerged that Princess Anne had quietly reached out through a third party, offering Harry a place to breathe if he wanted to escape California temporarily. No official record of Harry responding exists. But behind the scenes, his inner circle began to mobilize. One of his oldest friends, someone not seen with him in public for years, was photographed entering the Montecito estate 2 days after the hospitalization. That same evening, Harry's private security detail reportedly requested Meghan's movements around the home be limited while he recovered. And then came the photos. A paparazzi drone captured aerial images of the estate's backyard, once the backdrop of their freedom narrative. But in those images, no children's toys, no swings, no stroller, no signs of Archie or Lilibet. The photos added fuel to an already burning fire. Had the couple's entire story begun to collapse? The whisper, once dismissed as a slip of the tongue, was now the central piece in a growing storm. Media outlets began investigating the couple's timeline. Former staff members, once silenced by NDAs, began speaking anonymously. And Harry, though still out of public view, remained the beating heart of the story, his silence louder than any interview. In time, Meghan reemerged. She appeared at a small charity event in Los Angeles, smiling but subdued. Her usual radiance was dimmed. She avoided reporters, gave no statements. But every camera zoomed in on her eyes, searching for answers. That same day, a simple message appeared on a royal news blog from a supposed hospital insider. No name, no verification, just a single sentence. He hasn't spoken to her since the whisper. Whether it was true or not didn't matter anymore. It felt true, and that made all the difference. By the end of the week, the phrase, "don't let her in," had become more than just a line. It had become a metaphor. For emotional collapse, for a marriage in crisis, for the price of living a life that's no longer your own. It was whispered by late-night hosts. It was discussed on therapy podcasts. It was tweeted by activists and mothers and survivors of emotional burnout. And all of them, in their own way, were asking the same question. Was Harry trying to say something that none of us wanted to hear until now? The whisper traveled around the world. But perhaps its loudest echo was inside the walls of the palace, where old wounds were reopening. And in the silence of Harry's hospital room, where the sound of machines and monitors offered the only reassurance that, for now, he was still holding on. For Meghan Markle, the hours and days following Prince Harry's hospitalization were a waking nightmare, though not necessarily for the reasons the public assumed. The media spotlight burned hotter than ever. Social platforms turned into a storm of speculation, judgment, and armchair psychology. But what made the moment uniquely tense wasn't just what was being said, it was what she wasn't saying. From the outside, Meghan had built the image of a woman in full control. Media-savvy, elegantly polished, endlessly composed. She was the Duchess who broke the mold, biracial, outspoken, progressive. She had, in many ways, reinvented what it meant to be royal in the 21st century. But in the aftermath of Harry's collapse and the now infamous whispered plea, "Don't let her in," Meghan was suddenly cast into a very different light. Not as the resilient partner, but as the potential source of emotional distress. It was a narrative reversal she hadn't anticipated and wasn't prepared for. Behind the gates of their Montecito estate, Meghan's world had begun to feel like it was closing in. The staff, those still remaining, described her as visibly shaken, not just by Harry's hospitalization, but by the wave of backlash that followed. According to a source close to the household, she spent the first 48 hours after the incident pacing the hallways, her phone in hand, calling advisors, reviewing media responses, demanding statements from her PR team. The phrase that reportedly echoed through the estate more than once was, "This can't be happening." But it was happening. And for the first time, Meghan was not ahead of the story. Public reaction was immediate and brutal. The whisper Harry uttered in the clinic, allegedly to keep her away, hit a nerve around the globe. Theories bloomed online. Hashtags trended. Commenters dissected their Netflix series, the Oprah interview, even old footage from their engagement announcement. Suddenly, everything was subject to reevaluation through this new lens of distrust. Yet while the world speculated, Meghan did what she had done so often before. She strategized. She called in her crisis PR team, some of the best in the business. The same people who had helped her navigate the fallout of the Oprah interview, the Spotify split, and even the ongoing estrangement from the royal family. But this time, they reportedly faced an uphill battle. This wasn't just a public image issue. It was personal, deeply personal. Meghan's husband had experienced a severe mental health episode, and in the middle of it, he had asked not to see her. That detail couldn't be dismissed. It wasn't the kind of rumor you could easily reframe or drown out. It wasn't a tabloid photo or an invasive headline. It was an intimate moment, leaked by a medical insider, that carried the weight of truth. And Meghan knew it. The internal debate, according to a source in her media circle, was whether to respond directly or not at all. One camp urged her to release a carefully worded statement emphasizing her commitment to Harry's well-being and mental health, pointing out her years of advocacy on the subject. Another camp warned that any statement would only add fuel to the fire, better to wait it out, let the noise die down. In the end, she chose restraint. For the first 3 days following Harry's hospitalization, Meghan said nothing. No interviews, no social media posts, no public appearances. The silence was strategic, but to the public, it felt telling. Meanwhile, her team quietly worked the background. Anonymous sources began reaching out to select journalists, offering context, what they called clarifying details. One claimed Meghan had not been allowed into the clinic due to a misunderstanding. Another insisted that Harry's words were taken out of context. Yet another floated the idea that the phrase was the result of confusion or a medication-induced fog. But these explanations failed to resonate. The problem wasn't whether Meghan had tried to visit, it was why Harry, in such a vulnerable state, didn't want her there. As the narrative spiraled further out of her control, Meghan reportedly became more agitated. Her inner circle shrank. Friends who had once rushed to defend her publicly were suddenly quiet. A few avoided calls altogether. One former staffer, in a moment of candor to a reporter, said, "This isn't a PR issue anymore. This is a marriage on fire." Still, in public, Meghan remained composed. On the 4th day after the incident, she made her first appearance. It was at a private gathering in Los Angeles, a charity event supporting women in media. Meghan arrived without Harry, wearing a sleek black dress and a subtle diamond cross necklace. Photographers captured her smiling, nodding politely, and engaging with attendees. But the press coverage was less than flattering. Headlines noted her absence of emotion, her refusal to address the situation, and most critically, her solo presence. "Where's Harry?" one headline read. "Meghan smiles while Prince recovers alone," read another. For those observing, the optics were jarring, and they raised an uncomfortable question. If Meghan was truly devastated, why didn't she act like it? The answer, perhaps, lies in how Meghan has always approached crisis, by projecting strength. Vulnerability, in her public persona, has always been tightly controlled, reserved for curated interviews and pre-approved narratives. But this situation was raw, unpredictable, and beyond her usual framework. It wasn't about public image. It was about emotional reality. And in that arena, Meghan appeared increasingly unprepared. Behind the scenes, tension within the household reached a boiling point. According to a source familiar with the couple's private staff, Meghan was furious about the leak. She allegedly demanded to know how the whisper had gotten out. Staff members were interrogated. Phones were reviewed. One longtime employee resigned quietly, citing a toxic atmosphere and emotional exhaustion. Compounding the issue was the silence from the UK. Not a single royal family member issued a statement. No messages of support. No outreach, at least not publicly. For Meghan, who had spent years trying to reshape the narrative around her and Harry's departure from royal life, the silence from London felt like a condemnation. At home, her relationship with Harry remained fragile. While he recovered in a private section of the estate, Meghan reportedly kept her distance at his request. They communicated sparingly, often through intermediaries, staff, therapists, or security personnel. She asked to speak with him directly several times, but he declined. One therapist close to the situation, speaking under anonymity, shared a chilling observation. Harry isn't angry. He's numb. And that's more dangerous. The public, meanwhile, began drawing their own conclusions. Meghan had gone from being seen as the supportive spouse to something far more ambiguous. Was she cold? Controlling? Was Harry finally speaking out in the only way he could, by shutting down? Comment sections were brutal. YouTube videos speculated on narcissism, trauma bonds, emotional abuse. Mental health advocates weighed in, dissecting Meghan and Harry's past interviews with Oprah and Netflix for signs of codependency. The consensus was sobering. Something was deeply wrong in that marriage, and Harry's whisper had peeled back the curtain. Amid the backlash, Meghan's mother, Doria Ragland, reportedly stepped in. A calming presence in Meghan's life, Doria had always stayed out of the media circus. But during this crisis, she was seen entering the Montecito estate multiple times. Some speculated she was there to help mediate. Others believed she was the only person Meghan would actually listen to. Still, Doria's influence only went so far. Meghan, sources say, felt deeply betrayed, not just by Harry's request, but by the world's willingness to believe the worst about her. "I've sacrificed everything for him," she reportedly told a friend. "And now I'm the villain?" That question, whether Meghan was being vilified unfairly or simply being held accountable for an emotional dynamic she'd long ignored, became the heart of the conversation. For many, Meghan's response, or lack thereof, painted a portrait of someone struggling not just to control the narrative, but to confront her own role in the story. The whisper wasn't just about Harry's pain. It was about Meghan's refusal or inability to see it. As the days stretched into weeks, public interest remained sky-high. Polls showed a dramatic shift in sentiment. For the first time, a majority of respondents in both the UK and US expressed sympathy for Harry and concern over his mental health. Support for Meghan, once unwavering among progressive circles, began to erode. Commentators began to ask deeper questions. Had the pressures of fame and branding eroded the foundation of their relationship? Had Meghan, in her drive to build a global media empire, overlooked the emotional needs of the man she claimed to love? And perhaps most chillingly, was Harry finally realizing that he had built a life that no longer resembled freedom, but rather another gilded cage? No one could answer these questions with certainty. Not yet. But what was clear, painfully, unmistakably clear, was that the distance between Meghan's public persona and her private role as a wife had never been wider. And for the first time since stepping onto the world stage as a duchess, Meghan Markle was standing alone in a story she couldn't write herself. Behind every photograph of smiles and held hands, behind every curated interview and sleekly edited Netflix montage, there was another story quietly unfolding within the walls of the Montecito estate. It was one rarely told, whispered only in fragments by those who had seen too much and signed contracts not to speak. But now, with Prince Harry's health crisis tearing through the front pages and Meghan Markle's silence growing more deafening, the veil over their private life began to lift. And what emerged was a far more complicated, often troubling portrait of a marriage cracking under the weight of everything it tried to project. Insiders who had worked with the Sussexes described a relationship that was less a romantic partnership and more a high-stakes business venture. In the early days, they said, Harry had been enchanted by Meghan's determination, her drive, her ability to command a room. She made him feel purposeful, alive. But as the years wore on, that same drive became a force that consumed their daily life. According to a former staffer, who had served the couple from their final year in the UK to their second year in California, Harry's mood began to change around the time of the Spotify deal. At first, he'd been excited, thrilled by the idea of creating something meaningful outside of the royal family. But soon, the demands became relentless. Meghan, the staffer said, worked tirelessly, calling meetings at odd hours, pushing her team to constantly shape and reshape their public narrative. Harry, however, struggled to keep up. There were days he looked like a shadow of himself, the staffer recalled. He wasn't sleeping well. He'd forget small things, cancel personal plans last minute. When he tried to step back, she'd pull him in again, reminding him of what was at stake. The former employee painted a picture of a household run more like a startup than a home. Whiteboards lined the home office walls. Strategic outlines for brand partnerships, production schedules, press appearances. Meghan reportedly managed every detail, from lighting setups to Harry's speaking notes. And while she thrived in that environment, Harry began to withdraw. He missed his brother, missed his father, missed, according to a close confidant, the simplicity of service work, of visiting wounded veterans, supporting conservation efforts, and engaging with children's charities. He wasn't built for Hollywood, the confidant explained. He was built for purpose. But in the Montecito bubble, purpose took a different form, measured in metrics, viewership numbers, and the tone of headlines. Another source, a security detail who had traveled extensively with the couple during their international appearances, described tension that was almost constant. Meghan, he said, kept strict control over Harry's schedule. Phone calls with the royal family were reportedly supervised or followed by long debriefs. On more than one occasion, the guard recalled seeing Harry step outside after an argument and simply sit in silence by the pool, staring into the trees. It wasn't rage, the guard said. It was resignation. He looked like someone trying not to sink. The friction wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was in the silences, the quiet corrections in public, the way Meghan would often speak for both of them during interviews, the way Harry, once known for his wit and spontaneity, became more measured, more rehearsed. Those closest to him began noticing signs of emotional fatigue. A longtime friend from the UK, who had remained in contact even after Harry moved to California, said their conversations became shorter, less personal. It got to the point where he'd only talk about work. He stopped asking about my kids, my wife. He just disappeared into this machine they were building. When the Netflix series launched, the friend watched with a growing pit in his stomach. That wasn't the Harry I knew, he said. It was like watching someone play a role written for them by someone else. But it wasn't just friends who saw it. Staff turnover within the Sussex household reportedly increased sharply in the past 2 years. Personal assistants, house managers, and communications specialists came and went. Some cited exhaustion. Others, according to leaked HR notes, felt emotionally manipulated or professionally stifled. One aide described Meghan's control over household dynamics as absolute. She allegedly insisted on approving all external communications, reviewing every press inquiry, and even dictating the language Harry used in emails to associates. It was her way or no way, the aide said. And Harry, he just nodded along. He didn't push back. Not anymore. It wasn't always like that. In the early days of their California move, there were moments of joy. Shared hikes, quiet dinners, birthdays celebrated in the garden. But those moments, according to insiders, became rarer. As public expectations grew, and as the pressure to deliver on multi-million-dollar deals increased, the couple's private life turned transactional. The breaking point, several sources said, began months before Harry's hospitalization. There was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. He became more absent during meetings, more distracted during public appearances. At a charity gala in May, photographers caught him glancing at the floor during Meghan's speech, clapping only when the rest of the crowd did. At home, he reportedly spent more time in his personal study, listening to old voicemails from his mother. He requested fewer joint projects. He began seeing his therapist more frequently. But what triggered the full collapse, insiders believe, was a personal project Harry had been developing quietly, a memoir addendum. Not for publication, but for his children. A private document. Something he wanted to leave behind in case anything ever happened to him. In it, he reportedly outlined not just his journey away from the royal family, but the emotional costs of the life he had chosen with Meghan. When Meghan discovered the document, an argument ensued. The fight, described by multiple sources, was not explosive, but deeply emotional. Meghan allegedly accused him of planning an exit narrative that would paint her as the villain. Harry, in turn, told her he was simply trying to be honest for the first time in years. That he needed to find his voice again. That he felt like he had lost himself in the machinery of their new life. What followed was days of silence. According to staff, they barely spoke. Meals were taken separately. Meghan stayed busy with media planning and charity work. Harry withdrew further. The night before the panic attack, Meghan reportedly confronted Harry about his growing distance. She wanted to know if he was still committed to her, to their brand, to their mission. His answer, one staff member said, was simple. "I'm not sure." That statement, perhaps more than any public fallout or media scandal, was the true crack in the foundation. The following morning, after the explosive argument that culminated in his collapse, Harry was described by a staffer as emotionally vacant. He had reached a point of exhaustion that was no longer sustainable. And as paramedics rushed him to the hospital, it was clear to those who had worked closely with him, something fundamental had broken. When news of his whispered plea, "Don't let her in," leaked, those who had known the couple intimately were not surprised. Saddened, yes, but not surprised, because they had seen the signs. The silent dinners, the lingering stares, the moments when Harry seemed to shrink, even in his own home. Some said he had become a prisoner of his own choices. Others believed he was finally waking up to them. But whatever the interpretation, one truth remained indisputable. Inside the walls of their home, far from the cameras and applause, Harry had been crying out for help long before the world ever heard it. The public saw the headlines, the glossy documentaries, the book tours, the interviews filled with symbolic gestures of healing. But few noticed the slow unraveling of the man behind them, the subtle signs that Prince Harry, once the cheeky, smiling royal rogue, was beginning to disintegrate under the unbearable pressure of a life torn between reinvention and remembrance. The breakdown that sent him into the Santa Barbara clinic wasn't sudden. It wasn't the result of a single fight or the culmination of one traumatic moment. It was years in the making, a slow-motion collapse camouflaged by speeches, contracts, and carefully controlled public appearances. And to truly understand the magnitude of his whispered words, "Don't let her in," one must follow the timeline of Harry's emotional and psychological descent. It began in 2017, long before Montecito, before Archwell, before Megxit was even coined. That was the year Harry first publicly spoke about seeking therapy to process the loss of his mother. In hindsight, that announcement was less of a PR move and more of a warning. At the time, it was praised as brave. But behind the scenes, it marked the beginning of a vulnerable chapter, one where Harry began pulling at the tightly stitched seams of his past. According to friends from the UK, therapy awakened something in him. It was as though a dam had broken. He began questioning everything: the institution that raised him, the limitations of his royal role, even the way his grief had been managed in silence for decades. He became restless, agitated, hungry for meaning beyond royal duty. Then came Meghan. Their relationship was electric, transformative, but it was also accelerative. Meghan, charismatic and media-savvy, gave Harry a sense of purpose outside the firm. In her, he found not just a partner but a mirror, someone who had also suffered, also fought, also endured. They bonded deeply and intensely. But that intensity, insiders would later say, may have been the very thing that began to erode his inner stability. By 2018, their wedding became a global spectacle. And from that day forward, Harry's world moved at a speed he could barely comprehend. Within months, he and Meghan were overwhelmed by the press. Allegations of staff departures, tension with William and Kate, and endless tabloid scrutiny began chipping away at his mental peace. It was around this time, according to one of his former royal aides, that Harry's anxiety deepened. He started arriving late to meetings. He stopped returning calls from longtime friends. During royal engagements, he would often fall into moments of silence when no one was watching, as if his energy had simply vanished. But he didn't speak up publicly. Instead, he followed Meghan's lead. They crafted their narrative carefully: speeches on compassion, curated social media posts, calculated interviews. All while, according to insiders, Harry's emotional state continued to fray. In early 2020, the couple announced they were stepping back as senior royals. That decision, now seen as a turning point in royal history, was as much about psychological survival as it was about freedom. Harry, exhausted from the war with the British press and isolated from his own family, believed that leaving the institution would solve his inner torment. For a brief time, it did. They relocated to Canada, then California, bought their Montecito home, began shaping a new identity. But what followed was a different kind of pressure, one Harry was even less equipped to manage. In the UK, his role had been defined for him. Now, in America, he had to invent it. The move to California, while publicly framed as a fresh start, was privately disorienting. Harry was suddenly surrounded by producers, agents, strategists, and advisors, all with plans for his brand. Meghan thrived in this environment. She had always understood the dance of the spotlight. But for Harry, it was foreign terrain. According to a close family friend, this was when Harry began showing signs of what psychologists refer to as identity displacement. He struggled with direction, felt detached from the projects he was being asked to lead, missed the structure of royal duty, even while resenting the institution. He also began to suffer physically. In 2021, during the taping of the Oprah interview, crew members reportedly noticed how pale and tense Harry appeared off-camera. One member described him as jittery, like he hadn't slept properly in days. Meghan, in contrast, was composed and eloquent. Behind the scenes, Harry's panic attacks reportedly returned. A source close to his therapist at the time revealed that he was battling insomnia, frequent headaches, and episodes of dissociation. He'd lose track of time during meetings. He'd forget commitments. He started isolating more often in their estate, taking long walks alone along the property's perimeter. The birth of Lilibet brought some joy but also more strain. Harry was reportedly overwhelmed by the demands of fatherhood, combined with the pressure to deliver content and meet deadlines for media deals. Meghan, focused on growing their brand and advocating for causes, often took the lead. This dynamic led to tension, according to those who spent time with the couple. Then came the release of Spare, Harry's memoir. The process of writing the book was, for Harry, a cathartic but deeply painful experience. He was forced to relive his trauma, the death of his mother, his years of feeling like the spare to William's heir, the inner conflicts with his father. According to the ghostwriter, Harry broke down multiple times during the process. By the time the book hit the shelves in early 2023, Harry was visibly gaunt. In interviews, he seemed more reflective, but also more distant. Observers noted how often he deferred to Meghan when asked about their future. When speaking alone, he tended to circle back to the past, almost compulsively. In the months that followed, their Netflix docuseries launched, drawing both praise and criticism. While the production was sleek, friends say Harry hated watching himself on screen. He reportedly told one confidant, "It doesn't feel like me anymore." He stopped exercising regularly. His appetite fluctuated. He became irritable with staff. Meghan's inner circle reportedly grew frustrated with his disengagement. Meetings were missed. Deadlines delayed. Harry became, in the words of one advisor, a ghost walking through his own life. One evening, after a small argument about press strategy, Harry reportedly retreated into his study and listened to the same recording, an old voicemail from his mother, on loop for over an hour. By late 2023, it was clear to those closest to him that something was wrong. Therapy resumed, more intensively. He began seeing a trauma specialist twice weekly. Meghan supported this publicly but privately urged him to stay focused on their projects. "We can't afford to lose momentum," she reportedly said during a strategy meeting. In January 2024, Harry canceled a planned trip to the UK for a charity event. He cited scheduling conflicts, but insiders say he experienced a full-blown panic episode the night before his flight. It was one of many incidents that year. Staff at the Montecito home began noticing increasingly erratic behavior, mood swings, bursts of energy followed by long silences, and deep emotional withdrawal. On one occasion, Harry reportedly spent hours alone in the garden, refusing to come inside even as rain poured down. In early 2025, things escalated further. During a visit to a local veterans center, Harry became visibly emotional during a private conversation with a young soldier. Later that evening, he allegedly broke down at home, telling Meghan, "I don't know who I am anymore." That breakdown led to a temporary separation within the house. Harry moved into the guest quarters. Meghan, busy preparing a keynote speech for an international conference, reportedly felt blindsided by his withdrawal. She pushed for clarity. Harry asked for space. They agreed to see a couples counselor. But sessions were tense. According to someone close to the therapist, Meghan dominated the conversation. Harry was quiet, often avoiding eye contact. When asked directly how he felt in the marriage, he reportedly answered, "Tired." By the time summer arrived, the cracks were no longer invisible. The week of his hospitalization, staff noted that Harry was barely speaking to anyone. He stayed in his room most days, ate little, canceled 2 interviews. And then, on that fateful day, following a quiet but emotionally charged fight, he collapsed. The whisper, "Don't let her in," wasn't the start of his unraveling. It was the bottom of a long, painful fall. And for the first time, the world saw the man behind the brand. Not the prince, not the activist, not the media figure, but a broken son, a fractured husband, and a soul desperately trying to breathe again. News of Prince Harry's hospitalization reached Buckingham Palace not through official channels, but via breaking alerts blasted across every media outlet in Europe. The message came cloaked in tabloid dramatics, but the core was unmistakably serious. Prince Harry had suffered a medical emergency following a reported psychological breakdown. The gravity of the situation wasn't lost on the royal household. And yet, within the centuries-old walls of the firm, where emotion is rarely allowed to interrupt protocol, the reaction was one of both quiet urgency and deep discomfort. Charles, now king, received the call mid-afternoon London time. According to insiders, he was in a private meeting at Clarence House when his personal secretary entered with a phone in hand, whispering something that made the monarch visibly pause. It was only after he abruptly ended the meeting and excused himself to a private room that staff around him knew something was very wrong. The call came from an unnamed senior aide still connected to Harry's team in California. The message was short but direct. Harry had been admitted to his Santa Barbara clinic for treatment after collapsing following a severe argument with Meghan. His condition was stable, but emotionally fragile. No official statement was being released. For now, discretion was requested. Charles reportedly sat in silence after the call ended. Those close to him described his expression as more than worry. It was something closer to heartbreak. Whatever had transpired between father and son in the past few years, whatever pain, betrayal, silence, none of it mattered in that moment. His youngest child was in crisis, and there was nothing he could do. Despite the family's long-standing policy of not reacting publicly to personal matters, a quiet flurry of internal activity began. The king summoned his private physician to review the information provided about Harry's diagnosis. Royal security officers were briefed. The palace communications team was told to prepare for a potential public reaction should the story explode further. But no statement was issued. Not yet. Meanwhile, across town at Kensington Palace, Prince William was pulled from a meeting on climate strategy with senior advisors. According to palace sources, he initially dismissed the interruption until he saw the expression on his aide's face. A call had come in. The words Harry and hospitalized were the only ones needed. What happened next, according to those present, was completely uncharacteristic for William. He stood, frozen for a moment, then asked for the room to be cleared. Once alone with two trusted staffers, he reportedly said, "Is he going to be okay?" The emotion in his voice, those close to him said, was raw, real. The estrangement between the brothers had run deep. But blood, history, and grief still tied them together. And for a few fleeting moments, the weight of the feud gave way to fear. It had been months, possibly longer, since the two had spoken. Their last direct contact, according to reports, had ended in sharp disagreement. Harry, feeling increasingly isolated in California, had attempted to re-establish a channel. William, still wounded by the public attacks on their family, had refused. But now, with Harry's health in question, William was reportedly filled with regret. The royal household debated next steps. Should someone fly to California? Should they send a message through a formal intermediary? Should they reach out directly? It was Princess Anne who ultimately pushed for something more personal. Ever the no-nonsense pillar of the family, she reportedly told Charles in private, if he's asking for space, give him space. But let him know we're still his family. So the king did something unexpected. He drafted a handwritten letter, something rarely done in royal circles outside of formal events. According to insiders, it was short, heartfelt, and free of formality. He didn't mention the institution, didn't speak of duty or scandal. He simply told Harry that he was loved, that he was missed, that the door was open, should he ever want to come home, not to the firm, but to the family. The letter was sealed and sent via diplomatic courier. Whether Harry received it or read it right away remains unknown. But those around Charles said it was the most human thing they'd seen from the king since his ascension. Meanwhile, back at Kensington Palace, William reportedly sat for over an hour in his private office, flipping through old photographs. Ones that captured him and Harry as children, laughing with Diana, running through Balmoral fields, dressed in uniforms at military parades. To the world, William was the poised heir, the family anchor. But in those quiet moments, he was simply a brother facing the terrifying possibility that he might lose the only other person who truly remembered their mother in full.